Hi, it's Alexander Russo with The Grade, and this is the Education Show. And I'm happy to have Corey DeAngelis here today to talk about his own career, school choice, and journalism. Corey, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alexander, thanks for having me.
You are just back as of Friday, today, the 30th, from Washington, D.C. Tell me a little bit about what your life is like these days.
Yeah, a lot of traveling, and I do have a baby, 1.5-year-old. Her name is Angelina, and yeah, just usually they travel with me, but yesterday, for example, was just a real quick in and out 1 day trip, so missed the family. But yeah, I was there for National School Choice Week, which is this
Right.
week. It's the 16th year of National School Choice Week, and the White House had a mini celebration slash roundtable where we discussed the new federal tax credit scholarship that passed as part of the Big Beautiful Bill, which was one of Trump's main education priorities, which was to get nationwide school choice. Every state has to opt in if they want to receive scholarships, but anybody, regardless of what your governor does, can donate up to $1,700 a year to get a dollar for dollar tax credit on your tax return. So you donate $1,700 now. Well, it hasn't started yet, not until January of 2027. But in the
Right.
next tax year of, the next April, you'll get that $1,700 back. And they had a map of the states that had opted in, but it was already outdated by yesterday because New Hampshire was added to the list as the 27th state that had a governor opt in. Every Republican governor has opted in except for Vermont. And there has been one Democrat that's crossed the aisle and done the right thing. His name is Jared Polis out of Colorado.
Right.
And he told the Colorado Sun that he would be crazy not to join. And he said it was a quote unquote no brainer decision. And I've compared it to the 21 drinking age where, every state decides 21, but that's only because it's tied to federal highway funding. And so it's 21 across the board. And I think we're going to have a similar situation with this nationwide school choice program because even politicians who were previously aligned with the teachers unions can see this doesn't touch a dollar of local, state, or federal education money. It just injects new private donations into your education sphere in your state. And oh, by the way, if you don't opt in, because people can donate, if Jared Polis said no, Colorado residents would be, whether they knew it or not, subsidizing scholarships to Governor Greg Abbott's constituents,
Right.
Governor DeSantis's constituents. And why would he want to do that? Like he said, he would be crazy not to participate and allow the money to flow into his state. So we'll see what happens going forward. But I think it's going to be one of those things where maybe not initially, but over time, we're going to have everybody participate.
I hadn't thought about the driving speed comparison. The comparison that I keep thinking of is the Medicaid expansion. Not everyone liked the Medicaid expansion idea from the start, but a lot of people ended up feeling like it was just too much in their constituents' interest to participate, not to. And so eventually a lot of people ended up joining.
Yeah, and that argument, that's a good one because it applies to state level programs too. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem with school choice. But once it passes, you build that new constituency that will fight really hard to keep it. And even before the COVID mania and the school closures led to this school choice revolution when the schools were closed and families were upset with what they saw in the classroom, we had a glimpse of this happen in Florida. In 2018, the Wall Street Journal had an op-ed by Bill Maddox, and the headline was "School Choice Moms Tip the Governor's Race in Florida." So a lot of people thought Andrew Gillum was going to beat Ron DeSantis first time around. DeSantis barely won by like a 0.3 percentage points. And you looked at the exit polls, and Black moms in particular came out in force for DeSantis a lot higher than expected, at least. And if you did the quick math on that, they already had about 100,000 kids using the program at the time. And the data showed that it was disproportionately low income and non-white kids. And Andrew Gillum called to get rid of the scholarships. So the story goes, that those same families who might have disagreed with DeSantis on everything else, they saw this as like a single issue. They wanted their kid to get a better education than they had. And so if they had to switch parties for this reason, they were going to do it because it was such a huge benefit that they saw for their individual family. So I think you're right. And I wrote about this in my book, The Parent Revolution, which was a national bestseller endorsed by Trump,
Nope.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth.
Show it to us. There we go.
And Randy Weingarten copied the background. I don't know if you caught that, but her book, Why Fascists Fear Teachers, same color scheme. The word fascist is in red on hers, but it's the same layout. She told someone on a podcast that she didn't plagiarize. It was just a coincidence. All books look like this. And even though they're a year apart and I dedicated mine to her, there's no way that she planned that. It was just a
Minutes
coincidence.
in and you're already going at Randy.
That's right. And she left to Blue Sky, by the way. She's no longer on X, which is such a shame because we're not going to be able to see. She's not going to be able to see all the wins that we're having on the school choice front. But anyway,
let's jump in and talk a little bit about X, which I still call Twitter, because I want folks to know a little bit about your origin story, and I'm also interested in your origin story. I went back and tried to find the first DM between the two of us. I got back to 2019. You were saying to me and to everyone else, hey, there's this video in which Senator Warren mischaracterizes her kids' participation in private schools. Is that where the Corey DeAngelis story starts? Or did I hear you were in a PhD program? Tell me the backstory.
Yeah, I was. So you can call me doctor, but I'm not a real doctor. I'm more like a Jill Biden doctor. I could help you with math and stuff, but I can't help you with the important medical stuff. But no, I did do a PhD at the University of Arkansas, and I'd say it was a pretty ideologically balanced department. We had liberals and conservatives, and a lot of people think of education schools as like super far left, very hostile to conservative values and things like school choice. But this one was, started with a grant by the Waltons, and I would say had a pretty good mix of liberal and conservative professors. And my dissertation chair, my main advisor, is Patrick Wolf, and he's still at the University of Arkansas. Jay Green was the department chair. He went over to Heritage, and now he's at Defense of Freedom Institute, and Do No Harm. But my first study with Patrick Wolf at the University of Arkansas, I moved over there to Arkansas, I think in like 2015, and our first study came out in 2016, and it linked to the Milwaukee Voucher Program, which started in 1990. And the Arkansas team had the state mandated evaluation data from the program from a long time ago. And so, I wasn't around then studying the program back in the initial years, but we had the same student level data that we could track over time. And we had this brilliant idea in Wisconsin, you only need basic information to get criminal records. You need first name, last name, date of birth. You don't have to pay for them. You just need to put in the grit and hard work to type it all in one at a time for thousands of kids. And so I did that when I started my program because I was kind of ahead of a lot of the stuff. It was summertime. And as a new grad student, very eager to get to work, we found a large reduction in crime associated with usage of that program compared to the kids who remained in the public school system. There's a lot of different reasons for that. Over time, I've published now 40 peer-reviewed journal articles, and I mostly liked to look at things that weren't captured by a standardized test, like satisfaction, political participation, tolerance of others, these kind of character development traits, how hard you work, and there's different ways to measure that as well. And so
how did you become, sorry to interrupt, how did you turn into crazy man on Twitter? How did that go? How did you go from grad?
So I thought I was going to go into academia, and I thought that if I just published a lot, so I was in the office all the time at Arkansas. I was not really home much, and I just churned out as much research as I could because I thought that, if I did a good job and produced a lot of studies, these 50-page reports, that people were going to care about them and that I was going to get a job at a university. I didn't really put in a hard effort to go into academia because after a while I saw through the peer review process, it was more like my enemies than my peers. And it was double blind, which typically meant they knew who I was because I'd released my paper online before submitting it to a journal. But I had no way of knowing who was reviewing my paper. And this crime study, which I thought was pretty basic, which, here's the data, here's the results, here's the program. They said I couldn't even ask that question of whether school choice could reduce crime. And so I was going through these kind of ridiculous nonsense, and you can't hold the people accountable because they could accept another study with a result that they like and then reject yours with better methods because they don't like the result, because they don't like school choice. And you'll have no way of knowing there's no track record. It's not public information. It's de-identified. It's a quote unquote double blind peer review process. So there's no accountability kind of baked in. And I started getting tired of that. And I saw that I would be kind of pushing against the grain trying to go into an academic institution. I only applied for 3 schools. And most people, when they go on the job market, they apply for hundreds to try to get into an academic program. But I already had a job offer from Cato Institute 2 years into my program of a 4-year program. Some people take 5. And so I was already done with every class except for 2. I moved to Washington, D.C. in January of 2017. And I was finishing my dissertation, which was basically already written because, again, I thought studies were important. So I wrote a bunch of them. And so I was able to piece together 3 different chapters and have my dissertation presented later that next spring. And one of my peer reviews, for example, they didn't just say I couldn't ask the question. In the crime study, for example, which was a groundbreaking study, nobody had looked at this before because nobody could get this kind of data, is they said that that they thought it was a causal relationship, which that should be the end of the story. If they buy the methods, it should get published. But they said, you know what? 1, why are you asking the question? But then 2, you didn't discuss how the results related to whiteness, structural oppression, and all these other terms that I had no idea what the heck they're even talking about. And I thought that would be biased if I introduced all these other things instead of just saying, here's the data, here's what the results say, you make your own conclusions. And so I really started to get kind of a taste of this kind of social justice stuff that's kind of ingrained. Some people call it critical race theory into the education schools that I didn't experience, when I was growing up. And, when I did my bachelor's and master's in economics, it was just kind of more of like a hard science, even, it's still a social science, but it was more just about what did the data show. And so I was very confused through the peer review process. Ended up going to Cato, and I continued through the think tank route. I had one offer from an academic institution when I was at Cato. Again, I only applied for 3. 2 of them didn't even call me back. And that one was called Kennesaw State University in Georgia. And Ben Scafferty, who's a Friedman Fellow, they have like a center of like free market. So I knew I was going to have a shot there. And they offered me a clinical professor position. But I also had a job offer from Reason at the time, and I took that one. And looking back, I'm very happy that I did because it empowered me to do what I wanted. Even in a free market kind of ed school with this kind of little center there, I would still have to deal with all the bureaucracy and kind of the political correctness of the departments and stuff like that goes along with academia. So I kind of got unleashed at that point, and I'm getting to the point of your question here. And I was told at the time, I started using Twitter when I was going to think tanks because, that was kind of, at first it was, I didn't really talk to the media much. I just kind of stayed in my cubby and I did my research and had my head down. And I thought that was important. I thought the 50-page research papers were important, but it turned out your peer reviewers don't even read it half the time. No one else reads it. Right. And what's really important is media work, convincing people in the public, being able to make arguments and debate. And what better way to do so to hone your skills than to go onto Twitter, where you were forced at the time, 140 characters. You had to make soundbite arguments that could convince people who were sitting on the fence very quickly. And I got really good at that. And my bread and butter when I first started on Twitter was arguing with people who didn't like school choice. And that was all I did. And of course, I wrote reports for Cato and did longer form stuff, op-eds. But I really started gaining a following as the guy who fought with the other side on school choice and made the idea more digestible. I was the one who coined the term fund students, not systems. And kind of my bread and butter was also to point to programs that Democrats support, like you pointed out Medicaid. Those are like vouchers for hospitals, and you don't have to go to a government hospital, and definitely not an assigned hospital. It's portable. And same thing with food stamps. You can take the money to a private grocery store. Yeah, it has to be used on food, but you're not assigned to one place, and it's not run by the government. And so I just use analogies really from the get-go, showing that, if you support all these other things, Why not for K through? You support it for pre-K. You support it for college. You have vouchers with Pell Grants that can be used at religious universities if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with pre-K programs. Head Start can be used at religious pre-Ks if you want. If the funding follows the person is the point.
Right.
And so that's how it.
It's an interesting story. I'm reminded a little bit of Jacob Savage's recent article in Compact about millennial men. I don't know if you qualify as millennial or identify, but millennial men in academia and journalism and some other professions. I got to know you because you were calling out problems, either blind spots or mischaracterizations in the media.
Yeah, I remember that.
And winning corrections from the Washington Post and things like that. Sometimes I felt like
they had an article.
I was doing. How did the media part or the media watchdog part come into your portfolio?
Well, people were sharing these articles on social media, and I was just like, there's no way this is not true. Like, they can't just post things that are lies. And this is the Washington Post. They should have an editorial team. Alexander, it took so long to fight with this guy to get them to issue a correction. It is insane. They tried to all they did with me on email back and forth. And this guy took a jab at me a couple of years later on social media. So I found out later, and I knew at the time that he wasn't aligned with me, and he was just trying to find any excuse. The claim was that we haven't spent any more money on education since the 1980s or something, that it hasn't increased since the 1980s. And I think it was by Bruce. It wasn't by Bruce Baker. It was a guy at Bob Pianta, UVA. Yeah, UVA guy. Right. Bob Pianta was his name. And I think I remember going back and forth with Bruce Baker, who we've argued a lot on social media and stuff, and we've taken jabs at each other and whatnot. He's the guy who calls to spend more money. Let's just throw more money at the problem. I even got him, as I was working on the Washington Post article, I was emailing Bruce Baker to say, look, I know we fight on Twitter all the time and we disagree on everything, but hey man, even you, the school finance guy, you got to admit that this claim is false. Like, this is just not true. Like, if you adjust for inflation, whether you're looking just at federal dollars, just at state dollars, or just at local dollars, or at total, or per student, whether you adjust or not adjust, so any way you kind of slice the pie, that claim was not true. And so you had the Washington Post guy just saying like, well, what if it's just the state level of funding? What if it's, the percentage of the budget? Like, it was just like so ridiculous, like how hard. And it took like a couple weeks for them to correct it, because we were doing all this back and forth, this weird dance of, they were just trying to cover their butts and to defend the status quo, but ended up getting a correction. So good on them for doing the right thing. And the Washington Post is a different place now. I just got to throw that out there right now. They had their editorial board celebrating like the biggest wins of 2025. And one thing that they celebrated was that 17 states have gone all in with universal school choice, not in 2025, but since the COVID hysteria starting in 2020. And then, Alexander, you pointed out that some of the things that I did with my advocacy at the beginning was to point out politician hypocrisy. And Elizabeth Warren lied on video about it, and I blasted that as well. She told a black mom in Atlanta at a campaign event she was running for president in the Democrat primary. And Education Week, got to give them credit. They asked all the candidates a simple survey. It was like, I think it was just 2 questions. First question, okay, where did you go to school, public or private? Second question, where did you send your kids to school, public or private? Elizabeth Warren was the only candidate who answered the first question, because she bragged about going to Norman Public Schools in Oklahoma. But then she conveniently left out the second part. I'm like, it's a 2-question survey. It's not like she didn't have time to finish the second part. Something's up here. And if she would have sent her kids to public school, she would have bragged about it, because she's like the champion of the public schools. But she knows that she knew that it looked hypocritical for her to be against school choice and to say she's pro public school, and she would say she's public school proud. But then at the same time, she sent her own kids, when it came to her own family, to private school. And so Alexander, it took like a week for me to figure it out. And I'm a pretty good internet sleuth to figure these things out. Alexander Warren at the time, her son, was 43 years old. I don't know how old he is now, so I guess you just do the math. He's probably about 50 years old. And there was no record of where he went to school. And so I had an idea to go onto this website called ancestry.com, and I had to buy a premium version to do so. And by the way, this is while I was at Reason. I wasn't making a bunch of money, and I was just, it was just bothering me. It's like, how in the heck is this? Like, I knew it was there. I just had to find it because she would have bragged about it otherwise, going to public school. And I found a yearbook entry from ancestry.com for 1 year. That's it, for an Alex Warren, same birthday, but it was in Austin, Texas. I'm like, I thought Senator Warren was from Massachusetts, and Alex Warren seems like a typical, John Smith name. Maybe I got it wrong. It was for 5th grade, the same age as her son, and I found out, whoa, she was teaching at UT Austin at the time, and the school, Kirby Hall, was right next door to Austin, UT Austin.
Right.
So, So I posted it on X. I said, holy shit. I got some pushback for that. Like, oh my gosh, why did you say holy shit? Now we can't share it because it's such a bad word that you said on Twitter. I was like, that's literally what I was feeling at the time, because it was the first time that I actually broke a story as like a quote unquote reporter. Charlie Kirk ended up picking it up at the time, and like it went viral. And all these other outlets started to pick it up too. And I thought, oh my God, this is a big deal. I said, this looks like Alex Warren, looks like Elizabeth Warren was lying. And so I DM'd one of the editors at the Wall Street Journal, where I don't think I had been in it at the time. And it was their deputy editor. And he said, yeah, you should write about this. And so I wrote about it. And somewhere along the way, there was a mix up. The editor thought that it was an exclusive, but I had already tweeted about it. And so that's a fun story that I've never told anybody before, is that I ended up having it accepted. And then my first shot at the Wall Street Journal rejected because I scooped myself basically by posting it on social media. And so I learned my lesson there to have that open line of communication. I thought we were good, but we established a good relationship later on at the Journal. And that's also very
old. I think that's also a little bit old fashioned by today's standards. Everything goes up on social media first and then goes to the.
And I think, that was still in 2019. So it's changed a lot since then, for sure.
It's a perfect story in some ways, because it shows your doggedness and fearlessness, and it was tremendously successful for you. I started noticing your follower count going up and up and up. You've got something like 200,000 on X alone. Along the way, maybe before, but along the way, you also started tweeting about DEI and CRT, so sort of school culture wars issues. And I get the sense that some people loved it and probably were goading you on, and other people wanted you to stick with choice. You just came back from a White House event. I got to ask, why are you not in the White House? Does the White House still have a DPC? I would think you would be at a DPC or at the department at least. And I'm just curious about how that works.
I think if you go into the administration, from what I understand, is that I lost you for a second there, Alexander.
I'm here. Are you there?
I'm hearing bits and pieces. So the question I heard was why not the White House? And from what I've heard is that if you go into the administration, unless I've heard wrong, is that you got to cut off a lot of your other affiliations and stuff. And so I don't think people know this. It's not public because I have a lot of affiliations. I'm not full time anywhere right now. I'm a free agent. I'm on contract with a bunch of different groups. And so I would have to cut all those things out. And by the way, I think you can make more of an impact from the outside than the inside. I mean, I think I would just imagine that going into an administration and government would just defang me, and I'd go into a corner and you wouldn't really hear much from me. And I see that with some of my friends that were more public on things. They go into government and, you don't hear as much, and they're still doing important work, I'm sure, but it would not allow me to leverage my skill set. And so I think I could have more impact influencing people who are in administrations than actually being a part of it. So, that That's
It makes sense to me. Let's talk a little bit about one of the things you're trying to influence people about, which is about the spread of choice. I see you on social media celebrating progress, talking about the advantages of the approach or of the idea. How has the coverage been? Let's sort of talk about mainstream traditional journalism. How has the coverage been of choice lately?
Yeah, and just before we get there, because you pointed out how at one time there was kind of a spat within the school choice movement involving me, where I was leaning into the anti-CRT stuff, not really explicitly, especially at first. I was just reporting things. Like, for example, I was friends with a guy named Chris Stewart, and he's still kind of doing things. I haven't talked to him. I brought him onto the Tim Pool show with me. We were very friendly together. We went out to wherever the studio was in the DC area, and we had a good time. But we had a split. And Steve Perry, I remember, I think he's in Connecticut. I think he runs a charter school. Steve Perry was trying to mend our relationship between me and Chris Stewart. We got on a 3-way conversation on the phone, and I was like, Chris, I like you as a person. I'm not trying to throw any shade at you or anything. I'm trying to advance school choice. And, if you want a school that is a left-leaning school, you should have the power to do that as a parent. But if parents are upset about critical race theory or gender ideology, I was trying, especially at first, to be as neutral as possible and just say, hey, there are a lot of different reasons to choose. Maybe it's academics, maybe it's safety, but maybe there's something to this idea of I want to raise my kid in my values and not have someone else kind of take over that decision for me. And so my point was, you go left, you go right. That's you do you, but don't inflict your viewpoints on other people's kids. But it wasn't good enough for Chris, and we had a split, and we not as friendly as we used to be, and we just don't really talk anymore. And I've been on his podcast, he's been on my podcast, but the thing is, Alexander, I see myself as a school choice advocate first.
Okay.
And the way I saw us getting to more school choice was, everybody saw this, but at the beginning of the days of the COVID era, some people in the school choice movement, some of the big players too, they didn't want to buy my argument, and they didn't think that, you watch the news and you'd hear on Fox constantly, the main narrative was, parents were upset about what they were getting in the public schools. They saw over Zoom school the indoctrination happening, and those families showed up at school board meetings that didn't really bear fruit. And so they had their mics cut off. They were labeled domestic terrorists. And so instead they said, if you're not going to listen to me, maybe I'll go somewhere else. And hey, I shouldn't have to pay twice. Give me my funding too. And so we saw the Republican states, 17 of them now, have passed universal school choice, more advancement on the issue in the past 5 years than in the preceding 5 decades combined. It's been a lot of momentum. The wind is at our back. And you can't say it was just that was going to happen without COVID. It wasn't just a coincidence that they happened at the same time. You had to put the blinders on to not put 2 and 2 together and see that one thing led to another. And that's what led to the school choice revolution. I saw that. So I wanted to mobilize more parents and report on the things that would make them unhappy. You see Libs of TikTok does this on social media, and she has millions of followers as a result. And all she did was share. A lot of teachers, quite frankly, were bragging about gender ideology in the public schools on TikTok. And so she would take that video, clip it, put it onto Twitter, and it would blow up because people hadn't seen these things and what, they're doing what? And they're bragging about doing this in the schools? I thought they were focused on math, reading, and writing. And so I kind of adopted similar approaches, amplified those videos as well, and reported on things that I thought parents cared about. And again, I've maintained the position that if that's not the school that you want, and maybe you like this stuff going on in the public schools, that's up to you for your kids. And I'm not going to fight to outlaw options that a parent who I disagree with might like. So that's kind of why I've taken that position.
And eventually this gets big enough that trade and mainstream publications have to start covering it. And my question to you, since a lot of the people who follow the grade are journalists and educators, is What's your take on the quality and quantity of the coverage of the choice movement in late 25, early 26? Is there anyone out there or a lot of people out there doing right by the topic journalistically, or is it still getting ignored or mischaracterized?
I got to think. I mean, I think it's I think a lot of it's getting ignored, and I think part of it, Alexander, is that media is totally changing from the old school newspaper style and even TV towards podcasts. We're doing a podcast right now, and people are going to watch it. And a lot of people, most people aren't going to watch the full thing, but they might see a 10-second, 20-second clip that someone puts captions on an Instagram reel or on X or on other forms of social media. And that's what most people see. And maybe they'll go watch the full episode later. But we live in an era of sound bites. And so, you mentioned a second ago that, we've kind of moved to this new era where news breaks first on X. I mean, you saw I think Nick Shirley's video on the Minnesota alleged fraud stuff with the daycare centers. He just posted his documentary on X, and it got millions and millions and millions and almost 1 million likes, I think, on that video. Yeah. And then it bubbled up, and then it went on cable news, then it went on podcasts, and that's kind of how things work. Twitter, the main benefit is that it's fast action, right? Like you don't have to go through the editorial process. And there are some potential downsides of that, but that's why you have community notes that Elon has introduced to fact check people. And you have reply functions. If someone gets something wrong, there's that instant feedback. And I don't have to go back and forth with the Washington Post. On Twitter, I reply to the person, this is wrong. And they even have AI doing community notes at this point, correcting things. So if someone tried to say that we've never increased education funding since the 1980s, that would get a community note on it, or it would get what we call ratioed, meaning a lot of people call it out and reply to it. Right. And so that's kind of, we are the media now, and it's more of, when you asked the question, my brain first went to, I'm trying to think of people who write for, the publications. I think Chalkbeat's one of them. Who's the education writer? And I don't know what the education writer is for these things, but I know Twitter accounts. I know Chris Rufo reports on CRT stuff. I know Libs of TikTok does the videos of stuff happening in the public schools. People know me as the school choice evangelist, and that's kind of how I think through things. And I think more people are thinking about individuals as opposed to institutions, and they're thinking about accounts as opposed towards you have Riley Gaines with the protecting girls sports stuff, and she will break news that way. And so, I'm telling you names that are on the right, but yes, I'm sure there are accounts that are doing a good job on the left too, but we focus on different things.
You mentioned the speed and power of social media. There's no doubt about that. And I've been trying to help traditional journalists come to understand this world that's emerged up and around them and threatens to eclipse them. One of the advantages is the speed, but that's also one of the disadvantages. I'm wondering, in 2026, you're a dad, you're having all the success with choice and other things. Are there things that you have done in the past in terms of being aggressive or calling people out or saying someone should lose their job that you wouldn't do anymore? You've been in the, everyone gets their time in the barrel. We've all had a time in the barrel. Are you a different, altered, or unabashed, still the same old Corey DeAngelis from 2020?
I think I've changed a little bit. And I'd say most of my work in 2020 was fighting with people online. And I'd say more so now, my work is about reporting news. And sometimes I'll get people who try to attack me, and then I'll respond to them. So for example, you mentioned about someone potentially getting fired. One of the recent ones was Mara Mon, who is a biological male who transitioned to female while at the University of Washington and changed the name from Matthias to Mara. And all I did was post on my Facebook, which that's not even I only have 26,000 followers on Facebook versus my 230,000 on Twitter. And I just posted, I never heard from this person before, but I just posted a video of a journalist, an independent journalist in Washington State her name is Brandy Cruz. And she's an independent. She voted for Obama, I think, and Joe Jorgensen in the Libertarian candidates, and for the first time voted for Trump this 2024 election. And she had testified at the state legislature in Washington and just asked the leadership of the House or Senate, I think both, they were both there, and asked them, do you think there's any differences between biological males and females that might give boys an advantage when it comes to sports in the public school system? Very basic. She didn't say there was. She was just asking what they thought. And the Senate president, his name is Peterson, his last name, he said, it reminded me of Judge Jackson Brown, Supreme Court justice, who said, I'm not a biologist, so I couldn't tell you what a woman is. He said, I'm not a scientist, so I couldn't tell you if there's any. Really, I couldn't tell you if there's any, physical differences between. And so that went viral on my Facebook and on Twitter. I posted on Instagram too, made the rounds, and I got a reply from Mara Mon saying, may there be Tyler Robinsons for you all, which is a veiled threat, basically. I hope you get assassinated, essentially, in a way that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And so this wasn't an anonymous account. On X, there's usually a lot of anonymous accounts that do this kind of crap. And they do that because they don't want any blowback, and they want to just dish it out but not receive anything. This person was on their public Facebook account, wasn't on private, posted it. They felt all tough and brave, saying that I should be killed. And so very easily, you Google the name, there's only one of them, works at the University of Washington. So I pointed it out on X, and that person's now had the website scrubbed for their page. I don't know I think there's an investigation going on, but look, we live in a world of reporting, and we want everything to be positive, but at the same time, we live in a world of politics too. Right. And so you're going to have people coming after you. I get it all the time in my direction. If you come swinging at me, and especially if you're going to have a veiled death threat, I'm going to point out who you are. So that's just how it is. So,
I got a couple more questions, Corey. This is really interesting. I appreciate you talking to me. And I want people to know who are watching this, that not everything that you write or talk about is ideological in an obvious way. One of the ways that you and I have overlapped has to do with accuracy, factual accuracy, especially when you were correcting the record. And the other way has to do with keeping kids safe in schools, school predators. I
posted one of these this morning. Teacher of the Year.
I saw that. This is something that journalists and educators need to be understanding, because there's too much of it. Any of it is too much, and there's too much of it going on in schools.
Yeah, and when I report these things, it's very fact-based, because it's a very sensitive subject, and if it's alleged, it's alleged, and if they're charged, it's not the same thing as convicted. And no one wants to touch this topic with a 10-foot pole.
Well, there are some people on the journalistic side. I can tell you, there's a guy named Matt Drange who's working on a book about this. He exposed a lot of misbehavior and criminal behavior going on for years. And I appreciate and I'm encouraging journalists to look at these issues. So I just want people to know that there's what I'm going to call a non-ideological part of what you do. Let me ask you a couple more questions, and then let me get out of your way, because I know you're just back from a trip, and I want to make sure to get this up and out to the world so people can see it. The thing that people say to me when I encourage better coverage of choice is this, and I want your help in answering this. If choice is so good, and if unions are so bad, teachers unions, why aren't the outcomes better for southern states? I know there are a handful, the Southern Surge, that are doing better. But
Mississippi Miracle,
Florida, Texas. There are a lot of red states that aren't leading the pack when it comes to kids learning how to read and do math and succeed in college. So help me understand the choice versus red state and teachers union thing if you can. I'd love to hear your answer.
Yeah, well, you could just point to the flip side. You can point at blue cities. You can look at Chicago Public School, where they killed their school choice program. The union president sends her own kid to a private school, called school choice racist, but then exercised it for her own child a couple of years after the claim. And killed school choice for thousands, 9,000 low-income families that were using the program. And they have 55 public schools in Chicago that have 0% math proficiency rates. That's something that more people need to report. Just the hard data. And they spend $30,000 a kid. And so,
what would you want people to do? On the literacy side, people say it can't just be phonics. It has to be phonics and deep knowledge and content. What is the add-on, if there is an add-on, to school choice that you would want states that are pursuing school choice to do in addition to choice? Or is choice in and of itself going to make all the difference?
I kind of started in this as a libertarian. I still am. And I was more on the line of choice will fix everything. You don't need to tweak anything else. And I'm not really in that camp anymore. And the last chapter of my book actually goes on to say, look, choice isn't everything. Here's all these other, tweaks that you can do to the system and things that parents can do to improve public schools. So I call it like voicing your opinion at the school board, because even if you have school choice, there's going to be a lot of people who stay in the public school system. So, maybe having merit pay, the teachers unions fight against that all the time because they fight for the lowest common denominator, and they fight for uniform salary schedules, which incentivizes the best teachers to leave because they look across the hall and they see the guy that's twiddling his thumb getting paid more than him just because he sat in the desk a lot longer than the teacher that's trying as hard as possible. So I think merit pay is a good idea. I think school boards, I think that school board elections, you may disagree with me on this, should be more transparent. Some would say partisan, because a lot of them are nonpartisan and people don't know who they're voting for. So you'll have a red state that has a Democrat-controlled school board, even in a deep red area, because they just vote for the people who have the education doctorate, and because it looks like they're the education person. And when you can hide behind the independent label, you're actually masking a lot of information from voters. So I go over some aligning school board elections with the general election, because right now special interests control the outcome because it's like 5% or less turnout rate. So that's a threat to democracy if I've ever heard of one.
That's interesting. There's an outfit called Ballotpedia that tracks some of the stuff. Folks want to get more information on it. Where are you on the issue of guardrails? There's a book out just this last couple of weeks about the T.M. Landry School in Louisiana, unregulated private school. I think before the choice or the ESA era, but nonetheless, private, unregulated, turned out to be fraudulent. The kids didn't have real transcripts. How do you avoid having lots of T.M. Landrys as choice spreads?
Yeah, what's interesting to me, and getting back to the media side of this, is that Arizona, for example, they have a very robust, like 10% of their school population is using the ESA program, which is about half of the funding of what they get in the traditional public schools. And you'll have news stories from the Arizona Republic and those very biased reporters there. I think Craig Harris is one of them. He's one of the worst. And they'll point out, oh my goodness, families are spending money on Legos, or like they'll point out like some instances of fraud. And it's like, well, you never bring that same energy to the district run schools. So what I don't like is when people try to act like there's some unbiased arbiters of the evidence when they do have an agenda. I'd rather you just come out, like for me, my agenda is school choice. I'm transparent about it. So you can look through things with that lens, but I don't like when academics or reporters, for that matter, pretend they're unbiased, but then only report one side of the story. Would he ever highlight the abuse cases in the government school system? Probably not. And Jason Bedrick did a good job of this. He's currently at the Heritage Foundation. He was at EdChoice before, so he's a school choice advocate. But he has done a simple comparison, saying in Arizona, he lives in Arizona, and if you look at the fraud rates of the ESA program, it's something abysmally small, which no fraud is good. We want to get rid of all fraud.
Right.
But relatively speaking, it's like 0.001% compared to like the 10% of fraud that happens in the school lunch program.
Right.
And so are people calling to get rid of the school lunch program? No, but neither is Jason Bedrick. And he's just pointing out, like, you can't point to outliers and say, that would be like saying we can't have any public schools just because, as I reported this morning, one of their teachers of the year was engaged in, charged with a sex abuse case.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's an outlier. Anything is too much. And we should hold people accountable when those things happen. So getting to your question of the guardrails with school choice, obviously, if there's fraud, that's when the government should step in. If there's evidence of that, and people should be held accountable. And so that's how the school choice systems work today. But I don't think what I don't think we should do is say you have to teach to this test and basically make all the schools public schools, which are the same institutions that the families are running away from.
Right.
Because you don't want to make homogenize the entire market. And so, and parents also care about things that, and this gets back to your first question, Alexander. A good way to come full circle is that I started my whole career looking at non-academic outcomes of school choice, like crime reduction. That Milwaukee study found basically no effect on test scores, but huge improvements in reducing crime. So, the choice mechanism is doing more than just tweaking test scores and things that I would say are more important than math and reading, filling in the bubbles, which those are important too. And parents choose based on those things, but they also choose, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They want a safe institution for their kid. And DC's voucher program, here's another thing in the media. When their year 2 and 3 results came out, Josh Cowan did this too. Josh Cowan kept repeating that DC's voucher program had a negative test result. No, if you look at the third year evaluation, which is how you look at it, it had no statistically significant effects on test scores. And, some of the media spun that too. I think Washington Post, I think Valerie Strauss might have done this at the time. And this was back in 2019 when this study came out. They were saying it was a failure, basically. It failed to improve test scores. You see how they frame it. Instead of saying, and I wrote about it at the Washington Examiner, saying, well, it had no effect on test scores. They got the same test scores for a third of the cost. The voucher was only $10,000 versus the $30,000 in the public school system. That's a good return on investment. They're getting the same outcomes. And why didn't you guys report on the safety benefits that were reported by parents and students and the satisfaction and the attendance? That same study in the same report found large increases in safety, satisfaction, and showing up to school. Lo and behold, if you like where you're going, you're safe, and you're not bullied, you're more likely to show up each day. But the mainstream media wasn't covering those things. The headline they wanted was it was a failure, but they couldn't really figure out a way to say that. So they said it failed to improve the test scores instead of including all these other benefits, which I would argue is more important in the long run for kids' well-being. So that's why I don't want to regulate school choice programs based on these things, because schools are multidimensional. Parents are choosing based on a lot of different things. And, if you kick a kid out of a school, so like some people I disagree with on the right, like Mike Petrilli, he's kind of a proponent of regulating school choice. He is, I think, I don't know if he's like affiliated with like some charter school authorizers or something in Ohio, but
that's right.
It's this idea that this, like the bureaucrats can figure out like which schools should be open and closed. But you got to ask yourself, if there's a school with lower than average test scores, but they have a wait list and parents want to go there, what's going to happen if you close that school? They're going to be forced into a potentially worse school, and maybe the test scores are a little bit better, but maybe the safety's a little worse. And at the end of the day, I still go back to my libertarian Hayekian roots of, even academics, we're not smart enough to know what's best for everybody else. We have to allow people to have a degree of choice to a limit, because you don't want abuse happening. You don't want fraud happening. And that's where I'd be okay with government stepping in, even as a libertarian, where if there's obvious instances of fraud, they're not using the money on education, or if there's abusive situations happening, then the government should step in. But we shouldn't say before any evidence that, everybody's going to be abusing kids and everybody's going to cause all this fraud. We can't have any choices at all. That's like saying, that the government needs to come in and sit at your dinner table because some parents might not feed their kids the right things. Like that seems like a violation of the Fourth Amendment. But if there's evidence that a parent is not feeding their kid anything and they're malnourishing the kid, then the government could come in after the fact, but not. And so we should treat school choice regulation the same way. And I think the ultimate regulator, in a way, is the parent voting with their feet.
Right. Corey, I could ask you questions till the end of days, but we only have so much time. I really appreciate you coming in and talking about your origin story and what you're up to. It sounds like 2026 is off with a bang. Thank you again for coming on.
Thanks so much, Alexander. It's good talking to you. Let's catch up soon.